Today we're going to talk about children's right to education. Let's start by considering a couple of questions. The first is, should children have the right to decline to participate in homeschooling? Lots of children in the United States participate in homeschooling. Some homeschools are great, some are terrible. Should the child's education right outweigh the parent's right to homeschool? And if so, in what circumstances? And what do children have to say about their own education? What right do they have to make a say about what happens in their own education? The second question to think about, does the funding gap, sometimes more than $10,000 per student per year in the United States, does that funding gap violate children's right to education? As you can see from some of the images here from some underfunded schools in Idaho, some of them are literally falling apart. Is that a violation of children's right to education? So as you think about those two questions, let's dive in. Now, the right to education is at the intersection of many other rights. For example, the right to shelter. So where you attend school in the U.S. is based largely on where you live. So if you move frequently, you will have a difficult time keeping up with your right to education. I had a friend who moved very frequently with her military family as a child, and she said she had these weird gaps in what she learned because when she would move, schools would be at different parts of the curriculum, so she would repeat some things over and over again, but other things she wouldn't get covered at all. So her right to shelter, as that moved from various place to place, really affected her right to education. And if you don't have a home, for example, where would you do homework? Where would you study? Where would you keep your school materials? If you're hungry, how would you pay attention in class? If you're experiencing abuse, maltreatment, bullying, how will you feel safe enough in school to learn? And with schools being at the intersection of all these rights, schools have increasingly been given a role in supporting children's rights in these other areas by offering free breakfast and lunch, for example, by offering student counseling services, alcohol, substance abuse programs, and so on, and even some in-health clinics in schools. And it works the other way too. If you look at the data, you'll see that good education predicts good health. This is because education can help empower people, giving them more control over their lives. In school, you can learn healthy behaviors such as nutrition, how to exercise properly. And school can improve your employment opportunities and income, which can have a big impact on your rights throughout your adult life. Now, the Convention on the Rights of the Child has this to say about education. It should be free. It should be required, at least in elementary stages. Now, some have promoted the idea of expanding this to secondary education being free and required, and some have even suggested expanding this to post-secondary education, such as college, being free. But for many countries around the world, even getting education to where everyone at the elementary stage is free is a big challenge. So this right yet has not moved beyond elementary stages. The CRC also specifically describes children's right to education as special education services for those who have physical and mental disabilities. This means you have to provide a good education to all children, even for those for whom it's more expensive or more challenging to serve, and for those who have been traditionally left out of education in history. The other thing the CRC describes about education is that discipline used in schools should be consistent with a child's dignity, which is about banning corporal punishment, and should give children the right to engage in recreation and play. The CRC has some specific things to say about what education should seek to achieve. In contrast to much of the political discussion around education, the CRC says nothing about employment or salary, interestingly. Rather, it says education should focus on developing children's personality, their talents, and mental and physical abilities to their fullest potential. That school should be about developing a respect for human rights, for fundamental freedoms, and that respect family, culture, language, and values, and that promotes the spirit of understanding, peace, tolerance, equality of sexes, and friendship among all people. The CRC also says education should be about the development of respect of the natural environment. That too seems to be a political hot button right now. The CRC requires schools to be free, at least in the elementary stages. In many countries around the world, it's still common for there to be school fees or tuition charged each child to attend. This puts education out of reach for many lower income families around the world. In addition, even if school is free, school attendance means the child can't work, which some families rely on to get by. A few years ago when I worked at another institution, I had a colleague who had sent a good portion of his monthly check back home to Africa, where he was from, to pay the school fees of many of his nieces and nephews. He had a nickname, they called him, something like Uncle Bucks, to represent that his important role in paying the school fees for many of the children in his community. And as you think about costs and school fees, think about your own experience as a college student. How much debt are you likely to have when you graduate? How will that affect your life? What sacrifices are you having to make in order to pay that while you're a student? And getting a college degree will have a big financial payoff in the long run, but what does it mean in the short term? What are the things that you struggle with or are challenged or face because of that cost right now? And think about what would happen if you couldn't get a loan to pay for those costs. What would you be doing instead of going to college right now? Globally, there's a huge challenge in education. The scope of the problem is kind of hard to get your mind around sometimes. Some 59 million children around the world are out of primary school. Another 62 million are out of lower secondary school, and 138 million are out of upper secondary school. And in fact, only 1 in 5 countries around the world can provide free school for 12 years. So what kind of opportunities or life will children have if they're not able to complete high school, or if they can't even attend through primary school? What jobs will be available in today's global economy for those who don't even have a 6th grade education? Will you be able to use a computer? Will you be able to engage with AI? Will you be able to use complex thinking and critical thinking skills and creativity to do jobs effectively? What opportunities will there be for those who can't even finish 6th grade? Additional challenges face girls, students with disabilities, low-income families, and refugees. So it's even worse for people in these groups, with only 49% of countries having gender parity in primary education, and only 24% having gender parity in upper secondary education, with boys in those countries having much more access to education than girls. Students with disabilities face huge challenges. They're being about 49% more likely to never have attended school at all than their peers. Low-income families also face huge challenges in paying for school, in finding transportation to get to school, and in giving up on the income their children might provide if they were working instead of going to school. Refugees also face huge challenges in education, with around something like 4 million refugee children currently unable to attend school. In many places around the world, it's not just the practical problems of providing schools, it's fear of education itself. Malala, for example, said, "The extremists were and they are afraid of books and pens. The power of education frightens them. They're afraid of women. Let's pick up our books and pens. They are our most powerful weapons." Now, in the US, educational challenges are common as well. There's about 50,000 students, something like that, in the US that should be in school but just aren't. And COVID made this worse, with children just kind of disappearing from schools and districts, districts being unable to track where those students went, knowing they should be in school and not in school, but just uncertainty about they just kind of vanished and disappeared and can't be found. There's also been an expansion of the private school voucher program, which is leaving behind low-income students and students with disabilities in schools that now have less funding. School closures are more common in low-income schools and schools that serve non-white students, making it more difficult for those students to get to school, to have a community and neighborhood school as well. Schools are highly segregated by income and race, even as the U.S. population has become more racially diverse. Lack of regulations around homeschooling leave risks for those who are homeschooled, leave them at risk for abuse and poor outcomes for learning. There's big inequities in school funding, quality, and opportunities. We have some of the greatest schools in the world in the U.S. and also some of the worst schools. There's high dropout rates in some schools and some districts, and there's also a significant what's called school-to-pipeline prison we'll talk more about in a future week. So clearly there are lots of significant problems to address in education. So let's look at some strategies to address those problems. First, let's look at school dropouts. Some of the top causes of school dropout include low socioeconomic status, residential mobility, so moving frequently, special education status, having peers or friends who are dropouts, having high-stakes testing, having an unsafe or unfair school environment, high-stakes tracking, racial, ethnic segregation within that tracking as well. So some of the strategies would be things like replacing large high schools with smaller learning communities and alternative schools, expanding universal Head Start preschool early childhood education programs, reducing class size, especially in early grades, intervening early in the early grades, not waiting till high school to address academic problems or social problems, increasing teacher salaries to make sure teachers are more prepared and ready to serve students, having effective teacher preparation programs to make sure, again, teachers are well prepared to serve all their students, engaging families with schools, building stronger school and community collaborations, ensuring safe learning environments, and school-based health clinics and mental health supports to make sure all students have access to health and mental health supports that they need. So some specific things you can do to support children's right to education in the U.S. Vote, participate in democracy, make sure that your voice is heard, support equitable financing for schools, maybe even consider running for school board at some point down the road, stand up for your rights and the rights of those in your community through advocacy, volunteer in a local school. Lots of schools are always looking for volunteers to help support their students and their programs. Or maybe even consider a career in education, such as being a teacher, a school administrator, a school specialist, mental health specialist, school counselor, school psychologist, librarian, curriculum developer, educational technology worker, school nurse, school social worker. So there's lots of different ways you can have a career working in education. Globally, there's lots of things to do as well to support children's right to education. We've seen tremendous progress since the year 2000. The number of out-of-school children has been reduced by almost half. in the last 25 years. There's also improved gender parity, although it's still a big issue around the world to make sure that girls are getting access to school. Increased accountability for schools in achieving quality education is another success, that there's increased accountability, but there's still a lot to be done as well. So some strategies for defending children's rights to education internationally includes things like providing better financing for education, particularly through aid to lower and middle income countries who can't afford to provide schools for their citizens. Abolishing school fees, that's a huge barrier for families around the world to get access to school. One version of that they've used to try to address that problem is what's called the cash transfer problem, where these are programs where families receive cash for their children to attend school. So it replaces the income that the child might produce if they were working instead of going to school, and has a big community and societal benefit in the long run, as it increases the likelihood that the student will escape the cycle of poverty. So they get education themselves, then have access to better jobs upon their graduation, so that then supports the family and kind of breaks that cycle of being stuck in poverty. School feeding programs are similar, where they provide family food based on the child's attendance at school. And then in many countries, schools are simply too far away, so a solution is to build more schools and more classrooms nearby where families live. At the community level, investing in health and infrastructure for health, like clean water, makes a difference, so students don't have to worry about becoming sick and missing school because they're sick, hungry, or thirsty. And also prioritizing access to opportunities for marginalized groups such as students with disabilities, refugees, orphans, nomadic children, and girls, to make sure they have access to school.
We are fortunate in Iowa City to have some amazing schools, teachers, and leaders. Behind me is my neighborhood school in Iowa City. It's a clean, safe, organized, well-designed school that provides amazing opportunities for a diverse group of students. But sadly, many children around the world don't have that same opportunity. For this week's assignment, I'd like you to consider what voice children should have in their own education. Should they, for example, be able to tell their homeschool parent that they'd rather attend a local public school? Or should it be solely up to the parents to decide? Should children have a voice in the books, materials, and learning activities that they are provided at their school? Or should it be up to parents or adults to decide? Then reflect on your own educational opportunities so far. What voice or input have you had so far in your education? What would you have wanted to be different about your education so far had you had the opportunity to provide input? Next, I'd like for you to consider inequities educationally in the U.S. and globally. For girls, for students with disabilities, for lower income students, for racial minority students. What might be done to address these inequities? What does it mean for a child's future if they can't get a good education? And then if you have enough space left, consider how the right to education intersects with the other rights we've discussed so far this semester. And finally, consider what you can do in your current role, your location, and your community to support children's right to a good education. What career or volunteer opportunities might be available, and which, if any, might be of interest to you. Thank you for watching. See you in class.